the lymphatic system is a system of vessels that are very similar to the blood vessels of the cardiovascular system. But the lymph vessels, and they're found kind of throughout the body like vessels of the cardiovascular system. But the lymph system specializes in just transporting fluids back to in the direction of the heart from the tissues. There is no delivery of anything to the tissues. It's kind of a one-way system going back towards the heart. The lymph vessels play essential roles in defense of the body and helping you be resistant to diseases. The lymph vessels don't have a pump analogous to the heart at all. So the movement of lymph toward the heart really has to do with lymph vessels are situated where they can be squeezed by skeletal muscles on either side. So that squeezing of the lymph vessel by skeletal muscles around it and contraction of smooth muscles that are in the outer vessel walls, both help move stuff, whatever has been picked up in the lymph. Here's a picture of the red and blue are analogous to arteries and veins, and we're looking at a capillary bed in this picture. The green are actually the beginnings of the lymph capillaries, so the lymph vessels. So they're in the capillary bed. Lymph is taking in some of the fluid that is there. Lymph capillaries are a little different in structure than the regular arteries, arterioles and venules, and capillaries in a capillary bed, in that the walls of the cells of a lymph capillary actually overlap to form these little flap kind of valve structures. And those valve structures are tied by little filaments to the surrounding area. So when there's pressure inside the lymph vessel, it's already got stuff in it, it'll close off these valves and not take more fluid from outside. But when there's not a lot of lymph in there, and particularly if there's a lot of fluid around the lymph vessel, those little flaps open up and fluid can flow into the lymph vessel. This is just showing you how from the capillary bed the lymph flows up smaller lymph capillaries. They get to these little rounded structures which are called lymph nodes. We'll talk about those a little bit more. And eventually drain back into the veins really close to where they go back into the heart. Lymph nodes are important, and they're found kind of all around your body because they actually filter the lymph before it goes back to the blood cells. In this way, the fluid that the lymph have collected is screened or scanned. So you can almost think of lymph nodes as the like screening centers at an airport, for example. But they don't screen everyone, they just screen stuff that gets into the lymph. There are specialized cells that we'll talk about in a minute that are sitting in the lymph nodes that are scanning for any foreign thing that shouldn't be in your body to alert a general immune reaction to respond to it. One of those kinds of cells are called macrophages. Macrophages are phagocytic in that if they see something that they don't think is right, they will surround it, actually endocytose it, swallow it into the cell, and destroy it. And then we'll talk a lot about lymphocytes later that are cells that are specifically sitting in the lymph nodes scanning for particular specific things that they're made to recognize as being wrong. So, for example, chicken pox. There might be a subset of lymphocytes. They're specifically looking for things on a chicken pox virus that they can recognize are foreign, and they can start a reaction against it. Some of the lymphoid organs that you've probably heard about, tonsils, are a lymphoid organ, and there's several of them scattered kind of around your throat area. They're important in like a first line of defense, really, even kind of, and I don't really want to call it that, but they're the lymph nodes that might capture bacteria in something you ate, for example, and be the first to say, hey, you know, there was salmonella in that chicken. Let's attack it right away. The thymus is a really interesting organ because it's really big when you're young, and it gets smaller and smaller as you get older. The thymus is very important in educating lymphocytes, and we'll talk more about that later. You also have an organ called the spleen that is involved in immune function, involved in screening for things that aren't quite right in the blood. So the body is always in contact with bacteria, fungus, viruses, even cells that have mutated and become cancerous that are odd. And we can really divide the body's defense systems into two main kinds, the non-specific, or it's called the innate defense system, and then another system called the specific, or the adaptive defense system. These work together, but really if we talk about the body's defenses, we can divide the non-specific defenses into two main kinds. The first kind, you would almost, the first line of defense is almost a barrier defense. So the skin, if it's intact and you don't have any cuts, is a really strong defense. It would be very difficult for an invading organism of some kind to actually get through all those layers of dead skin into your body. Even the epithelial membranes that line your mouth, your entire gastrointestinal tract, and so the intact membranes themselves are a line of defense, and then secretions that they make, like the mucus secretions, also they're a layer that protect anything from getting across them and into the body. A second line of defense are very specific cells, proteins, and responses that we'll talk about here more. And then in the next section, we'll talk about specific immune defenses. That's a third line of defense, and those are specific lymphocytes that are recognize a specific foreign thing. So in the second line of defense, the non-specific defense mechanisms, these are not triggered to look for a specific thing necessarily, as in a given protein with a given shape. They're a more general recognition that something's wrong in your body. So we already briefly mentioned macrophages, which are a kind of phagocytic cell. This is a fantastic picture of a macrophage actually moving, and around it you can see these bacteria, and it is actually putting part of its membrane around that bacteria, engulfing it into the cell, and then destroying it in the cell. There's another kind of defensive cell called a natural killer cell that, when it detects a cell that it doesn't think is right, will actually attack and destroy it. It will even check for cells that might be infected by a virus, and will kill them. Specifically, what it is about the cells that macrophages and natural killer cells know that they're not right, we're not 100% sure what the signals always are for that, but it's not a specific protein, it's a much more general kind of thing. So here's an overview picture of, here's a bacteria maybe or something. Here's the macrophage actually throwing its membrane out, engulfing it, surrounding it, and then it takes it and puts it in a lysosome that will then break down the cell wall and all the macromolecules that are part of that bacteria and just use them or get rid of them. A very general second line of defense is inflammation. Inflammation can be triggered really wherever a body tissue is injured. And you can tell an inflammatory response is going on when you see these four cardinal signs. You look for redness, you look for heat, for swelling and for pain. These these cardinal signs come about from all of the events that lead to protection and healing that are a part of the inflammatory response. The inflammatory response does the job of really containing any damaging agents. If you recognize that a particular area has been injured, it will surround that area. Say you have a cut in your skin, there will be an inflammatory reaction to that cut that will kind of surround the area and stop anything. Your first line of defense has now been breached because you cut this skin, which is the intact barrier. So now your body just kind of assumes that bacteria, viruses, organisms are going to get across that breach, and the inflammatory response is a way to prevent the spread of those, to kill them off and get rid of them, and get the body ready to be repaired. There are a lot of chemicals that get released that trigger various parts of the immune system to react to something. One of those types of things that happen is something called complement, which is a group of about 20 different plasma proteins. So they're found in the blood. When they are activated, when they encounter or attach to cells that they shouldn't be, they're almost like a tag that will trigger, hey, this is something that shouldn't be here, and will trigger an inflammatory response to that. Fever is really a part of that heat of inflammation. Your body can actually reset your body temperature to allow for a little bit higher temperatures that speed up the enzymes that are involved in the immune system and help speed up tissue repair. You don't have to memorize this whole chart. The idea is that when you have an injury, there's lots of chemicals that are released, and those chemicals can help cause some of the cells that need to come in to fix the area to be attracted to that area to come there. As those cells respond and come into the area, a lot of fluid kind of collects in that area. The blood flow is actually increased to that area. That increased blood flow is what causes the redness. All of the reactions that are happening there are what bring about the heat, and all the extra fluid there causes the swelling and the pain. All of these are involved in